Welcome to episode 9 of the Dance Improvisation Series. Thank you for joining me. Today, I want us to explore a question we all pose ourselves at some point in regards to improvisation, and that is, whether there is such a thing as good or bad improvisation. Despite thinking about them, we tend to avoid or reject such questions, as dance, like other art forms, is supposed to be subjective. But I'd say we've started to rely on that argument too frequently, and as a result, it has become somewhat of a cliched response. Of course, personal taste is going to affect one's view on dance, and how we look at someone else dancing and assess whether they are doing a good job at it or not. And obviously, personal taste will differ among people in both great and small ways. But I would like to make the case that we often abandon our firm belief in subjectivity to come to a consensus about a certain piece of art, or a performer for that matter. To say that Yo-Yo Ma is a bad cellist is to be either very arrogant or incredibly envious of his skill. We can agree on someone's ability when we recognize that skill being used effectively. And that doesn't mean there is no place for personal taste. For example, there is no denying that Ella Fitzgerald sings incredibly well. Her vocal control and range are admirable to say the least. But for some reason, I just don't like listening to her singing. I love the jazz from that era, but I find her voice to be too perfect for my taste. Now, that's not a comment on her skill, because commenting negatively on her skill as a singer would be absurd. So, while we can all agree on someone's ability, that still leaves plenty room for personal preference. But what does all this have to do with improvisation, you might ask? How does this help us answer the question we're asking ourselves? I'd like to make the case that what attracts us about someone's skill in any art form can be roughly broken down into the technical and the interpretative. Now, the technical is, as far as I'm concerned, what you work on when you start learning how to paint, or dance, or sculpt, or begin any other artistic endeavor, because it develops the tools needed for the interpretative aspect to manifest itself. In a way, we don't have to focus on interpretation, because that will inevitably find itself into whatever we're doing. It's something which doesn't abandon us, because personal artistic preference is always part of you, so you can rely on it in a way that you can't with the technical. That's why we practice our art. We are practicing our skill in a very detailed way in order for our interpretation or artistry to shine through. So when I ask you not to worry about what you're doing during an improvisation session, I'm asking you in a way to remember that the practice of it will develop your tools, and that the more you do it, the more you'll move like you want to. That doesn't leave judgment out of the picture. In fact, it is still very much part of it. If you film yourself improvising and watch the video afterwards, you'll recognize the moments you like or dislike, and you will learn from that. So, that leaves us with a rather ambiguous answer to our question. Is there such a thing as good or bad improvisation? Well, yes, in the same way that there can be good or bad playing of a violin, for example. But that is technical, and since improvisation is so free, where can we look for technique? I'd say there are two possible answers to that. One, by improvising on a regular basis and starting to understand the ins and outs of your movement. And two, by trying different approaches and existing techniques, which is what I'm ultimately trying to do with this series. It all comes down to this for me. Spend time on the details that make up how you move, on the technique, for lack of a better word. Your interpretation, artistry, and personality will shine through, and that is what will truly be subjective. So I invite you to do just that right now. Enjoy.